Now we are live, and I can hear myself. We don't have anybody outside of here.
Vanessa, one.
If you guys have ready.
Thank you, sir.
I'm talking.
Okay, people are coming in now. So Millie is joining us via Zoom. Give them just another moment.
.35, and they can come in as we go. So first, good morning, everybody. The first couple of things is to call the meeting to order, which I just did. So Carrie, can we do a roll call?
Councilman Blair,
Yes?
Jane Orr, here. Mark Nakowski,
Here.
Millie Owens is on Zoom. Sherry Hanna,
Here.
Jim Hazelbaker, Michael Breen, and Sandy Griffiths.
Yes.
Thank you. As the other members join, I will mark their time.
Okay. So everybody, I think the minutes have been sent to you for item C is approval of September 12th meeting minutes. Do I hear an approval of the minutes? We have a motion, we have a second, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
I do have a comment from Millie.
Okay.
I've just invited her to unmute. Millie, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, hold on. I did. All right. I just raised my hand earlier to let you know I went to Zoom. But
Millie,
my
hold on a
minutes-
minute. We can't hear you.
Okay, they can't hear me. Is that better? Okay.
No, I don't know.
Okay.
You just have mute and unmute. Maybe unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now? I lost.
Yes, Millie, we can hear you now.
Okay. I wanted to say aye, and I didn't for the minutes.
We gotcha.
Okay.
Minutes for September 12th approved. Item D is approval of minutes from October 20th meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to approve the minutes from the October 20th, 2020 meeting of the Mayor's Commission on Water and Sewer Connections.
Thank you, Sandy. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second. Motion made and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I guess we're raising aye. Okay, so let's go to E, financial discussion. This is one we've kind of been waiting for, so who's going to drive that bus?
I drew the short straw. I'll be driving this bus today, or part of it anyway. It's sort of it's a team effort.
We're all strapped in. Take it away.
All right. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Gwen Rowich with the Public Works Department. And today, as Councilman Blair pointed out, we're going to talk about a big topic, which is financial review and discussion. How are we going to pay for sewer improvements? And this will likely be the first of a couple of discussions that we have about the financial aspects. So today we're going to provide you with a lot of information that hopefully you can take away and think about and come back to the next financial discussion with. So I always think it's good to kind of review, how we typically do things as opposed to where we're trying to go. So where have we been and where are we trying to go? So when sewer improvements are constructed or developed, typically regional mains, which are the collection mains that take sewage loads out to the treatment plants, the infrastructure that's required for that is typically paid for through user rates, as well as development impact fees for new development or new growth that comes into the city. When the collection mains are built in the neighborhoods, those are typically put in by the developer that's creating the lots for a new subdivision or development. And those costs of the sewer mains in the streets, in the neighborhoods, those are typically included in the price of the lot that you purchase before you build a home on it. The on-lot improvements, or those improvements that are put in with each home, are typically installed as part of the contractor. The yard lines for the sewer are constructed when the contractor builds the home. And then lastly, monthly sewer bills, once everything is built and constructed and operating, those monthly sewer bills are borne by the owner or the occupant. So that's how things are typically done. Today, we're going to talk about several things. First, we're going to have a short presentation by Candace Manny-Busan about grant opportunities that we've been exploring. Thank you to those on the commission that provided some research and gave us some potential leads for grants. We're going to talk about those. And then we're going to share with you some preliminary data that we've received from Carollo Engineers, who's doing a study for us about infrastructure that would be needed to sewer the unsewered areas and the areas that they have identified. Then we're going to talk about preliminary cost estimates that we've received for both the neighborhood mains and the on-lot improvements, or the connection fees for the homes. The impacts potentially to the ratepayers of these costs, the impacts to property owners potentially for these costs. And then we'll talk about some outside the box thinking that we've had from our finance department about other ways that we could generate some revenue to get these projects off the ground. So I'm going to start by handing the baton over to Candace Manny-Busan, our Public Works Analyst, and she's going to talk a little bit about grants. Come up here.
Good morning. My name is Candace Manny-Busan. I have been with the city for about 5.5 years now. I'm the Public Works Analyst. My background, I have about 18 years experience in researching, writing, and managing grant funds at other organizations, and a little bit since I've been here in Prescott. So I just wanted to kind of give an overview of the process that I use for looking for grant funding. I really appreciate all the submissions that everybody gave. I was really surprised to see some of the funding opportunities that were on there. Wastewater infrastructure is kind of a new topic for me, so it was pretty interesting to see who's interested in funding sewer related projects. The list that you received in the packet is just a sampling of actual research that I did. There were several more opportunities that I didn't include on there just because we weren't eligible for the funding in one way or another. But I wanted to give you an idea of potential funding, and then sometimes it seems so good, and then you get down to something, some little nuance, and then now you're out of the running. So it's really good just to kind of have an understanding when you're searching for the funding. So beyond the grant title and a 10-second description, there is a process, and this is a process that I use. Typically, this is kind of the order that I go in. Whenever I hit a no on here, I move on to the next thing because this can be quite a time-consuming process. So for funding sources, where does the money come from? And where do you start looking for funders? There's federal departments and bureaus, state agencies, municipalities, private organizations, there's corporate organizations, nonprofits will even give out grants, foundations, and then there's things like donor advised funds, which is like charitable giving if somebody leaves money and they want it to go towards a very specific purpose. And basically it's anybody who wants to contribute to a cause that they believe in or they have a vested interest in. Or sometimes they're told to, create a program. That's usually through legislation. Or you have people who just want to give back to the community. Some examples of that would be the Environmental Protection Agency, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, the City of Prescott receives actual grant funding, which we'll kind of get through on here. There's things like Walmart, they give out grant funds, the Bill Gates Foundation, and things of that nature. So the first thing I kind of look at is eligibility. So some of them are eligible for governments. And then the government breakdown would be whether you're federal, state, county, a city, a township. And then I have nonprofit, private on there as well. Sometimes they're for public educational institutions, things like that. And then the fund grants are unrestricted. Anybody's allowed to apply, but those are kind of few and far between. Eligibility, so it can be organization specific. So if it's for law enforcement only, fire, medical, public works, things like that, they get even more narrowed down into like a small business, or you have to be a housing authority. So eligibility, there's kind of a broad thing with whether you're government or a nonprofit, and then it can be even more specific from there. And then it can also be specific to other groups and individuals. So there's special districts and regions, like with FEMA funding, we're in Region 9. Those are the only FEMA funds we're allowed to apply for. They can also be, if you're a rural area or an urban area, and then they have very specific population requirements on what's considered urban and what's considered rural. A lot of times we like to think of Prescott and kind of our Quad City area here as being rural, and we are not. Rural with a lot of federal governments can be as little as 10,000 population. Sometimes it's 20,000, and then about the highest I've seen is about 50,000. So we pretty much exceed those populations. It can be for disadvantaged populations. So if it's, a grant specific to women only or minorities, sometimes it's just children 0 to age 5, or you could be low income. Some other eligibility requirements that come up are required partnerships. I have just a couple of examples of that. Say law enforcement, if they want to employ or hire a school resource officer, they must work with a local school district to be able to apply for that type of funding that would hire that person. Because if you don't have a school on board, there's no sense to hire a school resource officer. So that's just one example. The type of grant is another area that I kind of look at going down my list. There's competitive funding and non-competitive funding. Competitive funding, you are competing with other interested organizations. So that would be City of Prescott competing with Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, other municipalities, if it's a grant that we're all eligible for. Non-competitive funding is typically formula-based. I cannot explain the formulas for all of them. They can be based on a number of different things, but that's funding that it's entitlement funding. So the funds that the city of Prescott receives actually comes from what is it? It's HUD, and I'm drawing a blank on their their name, the Housing Authority from the federal department. They through their formula that they have created, the city of Prescott is entitled to a specific amount of funding per year. And so it comes directly from the federal government to the city of Prescott, and that's our CDBG funds that we give out. And then they look at us to distribute that funding within our community for projects that directly benefit us. We do have to follow their overarching goals of what CDBG funds do, but we can put that funding into our community where it serves us the best.
Candace?
Yes.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Mhm.
I understand the grant stipulations and all the conditions.
Mhm.
Based on the water and sewer area that we're trying to connect,
Mhm.
would the city of Prescott be the grantee for applying for funds for all of these homeowners?
Yes.
So i.e. the city of Prescott,
Mhm.
this is your baby to go through to see if you could get funding for areas for sewer connections.
Yes.
It wouldn't be left up to the individual platted communities or HOAs to do.
So that goes back to the eligibility. If it is for government entities only, so we would fall under the city township, then potentially, I guess, the county, but we would have to partner with the county for that. But we fall under city township. So if a grant says that you must be a government entity, then the city would apply on behalf of the city. There are other grants where it says you have to be a nonprofit or a private organization, which then you could form a special district, or again, you'd kind of have to really look into the details of what they would consider a private group, or individuals, because sometimes individuals are eligible for funding. So then you could apply for it yourself, which I believe the city, we'd be willing to assist with that. But those types of grants are not as common.
Again, and I'm sure that all of us in the room understand grants.
Mhm.
What I would find more advantageous to me as a commission member, and this is like a workload assignment to you, would be to see what grants are out there, what the application period is, when it expires, what the dollars are, which could give us some more information on fast proceed, slow down proceed, and what we look at.
Mhm.
But that's just my comment.
We do have some of that coming up, which I'll talk about. A lot of, so the handout that was put together was to kind of give you an example of this process, looking at, if we're eligible, what the grantor actually wants to fund. Because even though we have a specific goal in mind, we have to meet the overarching goal of whoever our funder is going to be. So if they're not interested in funding specific projects, a lot based on eligibility, then there is no funding available. So That list that was provided, like I said, is just a sampling of all of the grant funding that was submitted to me, and just more. It's kind of like the rabbit hole. You see one and then you can find another and then you find another. And so I looked rather extensively, didn't put any of that information or a lot of that information on that handout just because we weren't eligible for the funding. But I did want to kind of give an overview of the things that we did look at and what we could potentially be eligible for. Some more research is needed on some of those items where I listed it's a potential funding source, but we need to look at it further.
Right, because I see a lot of them were not eligible for
Correct.
the majority.
Correct. There's always this kind of impression that, you know, there's a lot of free money out there, and when it really comes down to it, it's not. You have to meet so many different criteria. So that's why we thought this would be beneficial, so that if you continue to look for funding, that you can kind of go through this process and really determine, is this something that is potentially something that we could apply for, or do I need to move on to the next thing?
Just note aside, I personally applaud you for your diligent hard work. This was pretty impressive.
Oh, thank you. So I can kind of cruise through the rest of this if you want me to, and then we can talk about a couple of the things.
Millie Owens does have a comment as well.
Okay.
Millie, go ahead.
Thank you. In my research, I came across the Prescott, Arizona specific area plan. And if I'm understanding it correctly, we as a city cannot grow without having the discharge water from septic systems put into our sewers. If that's my understanding, then you're depending on 2,800 approximate homes to contribute to the recharge system. So wouldn't the city be willing to provide the mains into the unsewered areas?
Okay. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, Millie, you're asking if we're looking at the individual homeowners to be paying for the sewer hookups?
Ask your words, that's a yes.
Okay. Correct. So the funding that the city is possibly eligible to receive, it would come to the city. And so basically, as you know, we've kind of explained before, the city is the ratepayers essentially, because that's where the city's funding comes from for these projects. So if the funding comes to the city, if it's in the form of something like the CDBG funds, we could offer some assistance to low-income families, because CDBG is very much based on low to, I think it's very low to low median income families. So there would be a process that people would have to just apply. If we were to receive the grant funds, they could apply to us. If they qualify, then we could give them some of the money. Now with CBGG, there is not a lot of funding available. That's actually one of the next.
Yeah, usually let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. The down arrow? Yeah. Yeah, it's not doing it. Have to do what?
Select the presentation.
Okay. Got it. There we go. So this is the funding that comes through HUD, and it's the entitlement funds that come to the city of Prescott. We receive approximately $255,000 per year directly from HUD. And then the city facilitates a competitive grant process to get that money out into our community where it's most needed. Now, the city is eligible to apply for this funding. However, we compete against other projects within the community that serve low-income residents. So we're competing with Meals on Wheels, we're competing with Coalition for Justice, I forget their whole name. There's multiple projects, Stepping Stones. We're competing with entities like that for this money. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. And when you consider how many residents are in the unsewered areas, I don't know how many would qualify for the low-income assistance. But, you know, you're looking at, you know, a very small amount per individual that money could go towards.
I think we need to focus, just me, about two different levels here. First level is the city's responsibility, if there is one, to put in the main lines, and that's what Millie's asking about.
Okay.
Which would be funding through grants to do the main line, helping the city do that. The other side of that is the funding of the individual property owners to hook up to the main line. So to me, those are two very separate issues.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of how we need to break it down and look at it, because by doing what we're doing now, it's getting convoluted, at least in my mind, that we need to stay focused on grants and monies that are available to come in to put in mainline. That's the very first objective. Because my conversation, and I only speak as one with the city manager, is that every year as this moves forward, hopefully there'll be money in the budget to fund engineering of a main line, which may or may not have substance from a grant, and then also monies to start a project that may or may not have fundings from a grant. So however you can distill that within your conversation, it would be great.
Okay. So some of the next funding opportunities.
And yeah, thank you, Councilman. But before we get off CDBG, just so you know, that would be more for, I think, like yard lines and stuff. We've run into problems trying to use that for this project before. Primarily, nobody really qualifies. If you live in North Prescott and you actually qualify to receive CDBG funding, you're probably renting the property, and CDBG funding can't be used to build improvements on a landlord's property. It's got to be, you know, owned by the person who achieves that low income level.
Now, I did find another funding opportunity where the owner may not be eligible based on their income. However, if they specifically rent to low income individuals, then there are actually some funding available. That's something I came across.
If it achieves the low income housing type federal program, which generally is not done on a household basis, it's done on an apartment building basis.
Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I'm just a little confused on the granting. Can individuals be applied to this granting? Or I thought it was all one project for the city to apply for a grant.
So there's different components, and that's kind of where I was getting to. So eligible expenditures, sometimes, again, that's another eligibility requirement. So sometimes grants will pay for just design. Sometimes they'll pay for just construction. Sometimes they want shovel-ready projects. So you already need to be at a point where you're ready to start hiring contractors. Some only pay for upgrades and replacements of existing facilities and infrastructure. Some funding, like the WIFA loans, they will not pay for new growth. New growth should pay for new growth. And so they will only pay for the replacement of our existing infrastructure or upgrading that based on what our current needs are. And then there's other ones that pay for goods, services, programs, materials, different things like that. So, so again, that's just, it's another factor that we need to look at.
But we would not be providing grants for individual property owners.
So that's where, like with the CDBG funds, if the city did apply for it, we could potentially give it to low-income homeowners, that might need some assistance. Again, that goes back up to that eligibility. There are grants that are eligible for individuals to apply. We are mainly looking at the ones that go for, or that allow city municipalities to apply for.
Okay, so am I right in thinking that we as the city would be looking for grants to help us lay the sewer lines and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
And then there would also be grants available for individual homeowners for hookups.
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah. So there, I'm sorry. And I got off on a different kind of tangent with that. There are different portions to this project. So yeah, you have the homeowners portion, you have the city's portion. Yeah. So if the city receives funding, then it reduces what we may have to charge ratepayers. If we could get enough grant funding, then maybe there is no increase to the ratepayers because we can offset it. Again, that's a bigger animal, but it's something to consider.
I guess I'm jumping the gun, but is there a probability of that? Has that been experienced in the past? Trying to get this done, have we ever been successful in getting grants for it?
I don't think we've ever taken it this far.
Okay.
Maybe Mark knows because Mark, was the public works director, but I'd have to say, I know there's probably the ability to get a grant citywide that is managed by the city for individual property owners. So that if the city got that grant, it would be a clearinghouse for each hookup partner, and they'd have to apply for that. But I don't think we've ever been successful enough to go down the road to figure out how to do that.
I would say not in my time that we, in that capacity, we were never in a position to get a grant for those purposes of private property connections. I think the comment that I would make is, the city, as part of this policy development, will look at, in my view, the opportunities for grants in any given year that we go forward. I think the idea is that we want to make sure that that's a tool in the toolbox that we utilize to the fullest extent possible, and how that benefits the overall project or the individual property owners will be determined based on the availability of those resources and our opportunities to be a recognized and a selective beneficiary from those fundings. So it's not something that we're going to solve at this meeting as far as discussing it. It's just to make sure that we're aware that that is something that we want to take advantage of when the opportunities are there.
Yeah, and I will continue to look into funding opportunities and resources as I come across them. There's a lot of mechanisms. I get daily emails from grants.gov for projects that the city is eligible to apply for. So it's not a closed thing here that we're done looking for funding. It's just that, again, there's always that perception that there's a lot of money out there and it's all available. But when you really come down to it, there's not a whole lot. I'll just go through these last couple of slides here. So the water reclamation and reuse water smart grant is a possible funding source. You can see it's competitive and it comes directly from the federal Bureau of Water Reclamation. There is a matching portion on this, and it's 75% non-federal funding that we would have to provide towards the overall project costs. So if we're asking for $1 million, we're going to have to provide 75% of that funding, and the remaining portion is what we would get from the federal government. So again, there's some money there, and it can help offset some costs, but it's depending on how much you're asking for, it may not be worth the time or effort. And then you can see in here that this funding will pay for planning, design, and construction of water recycling and reuse projects within local government entities. So this is where I was kind of going with some of the other stuff, is that you have to meet their goals and objectives in order to receive the funding. They don't come out to, federal government's not going to come out to your community and put this money into operation. That's why they do the grants. So they give it to us and then they say, what projects do you have or what needs do you have in your community that can meet this overarching goal that we have for the entire nation? And they do this because they feel, you know, that local people know what you need. They're not going to just tell you, hey, you need to go in and do this. So what we would need to do is, how can we make our project, how could we make the argument that our specific project will help with overall water recycling and reuse, which we kind of can't, because we're talking about, you know, the water going back into our system, or the wastewater going back into our system. Here's another one from WaterSmart. It's the Cooperative Watershed Management Program. They've already had a phase 1 for this funding. They're currently in phase 2 funding. Up to $300,000 in federal funds may be awarded, and there's a 50% non-federal match of funding. So again, and they're looking at actions that would increase the water supply reliability through investments in existing infrastructure. That sounds great. That sounds like we fit the bill. We really need to take a deeper look into this to see if it would, if they would actually fund our project. And again, we have to tie how our project meets their overarching goals. Let me go into that. Like I said, I will continue looking for grant funding. There are some other ones on the list, you know, that I had on there that it said it was potential funding, but it needed more research. Again, it's kind of a long, lengthy process. And the further you get down that rabbit hole, you know, you have to determine, okay, can we make this project fit their goals? Because that's essentially what grant funding does. Is you are helping them meet their objectives that they're either legislated to do, or it's a program that they've created to get that funding distributed to where it actually needs to go. So if you have other questions or anything, I'm more than happy to answer them. Or if you have questions later, just email them to Carrie and we'll get right back to you.
Just to, I guess, just to clarify, all these things and the financing we're going to look at in a little bit, those are already grant subsidized. The EPA back in 2002, I think, mainly moved all their funding of grants into state revolving loan programs like WIFA. There is, you know, like I say, we can get funding through WIFA. It's going to be reduced cost. All they do is reduce the interest costs for wastewater loans. Water loans you can actually get forgiven principal, which would be great in this case, because we've got about $12 million worth of forgiven principal on loans over the last 20 years here at the Prescott for water, but not for wastewater. It's always just a reduction in interest costs, and it's reduction on a percentage based on how your project qualifies. 10, 15, I think they'll even go up to 20% reduction in the interest cost, depending on different aspects of your project. Is it green? You know, does it meet the watershed issue? Does it do that? The bigger your reduction. Again, it's just reduced cost. And as you can see from the ones that Canvas has put up, there isn't hundreds of millions of dollars out there to do this. It's going to be much smaller. It's you know, it's a component, but we're already getting a component. And that's pretty much where wastewater funding is getting. Back in the 90s, we would get grants when we did the wastewater treatment plant and Sundog upgrade in 96. I think we got $9 million worth of grants for that. Those don't exist anymore. Like I said, the EPA changed the way it does its granting just through these revolving. So I just wanted to clarify that on how it used to be compared to how it is now.
And a lot of it's political. Back when we had the recession, what, 2008-ish, the government put out ARA funding, which was stimulus funding. And some of it was competitive and some of it was formula based. So if you were eligible to just put in an application and say, hey, yeah, we'll use this money, then you'd get it. and you could use it for whatever priorities that you had within your local community. But again, that was, you know, back in the recession era, those RF funds are no longer available. But again, you know, with the changes that are going on, who knows? Sometimes environmental programs will be our nation's top priority. Here comes all this funding. It'll come through the same channels it does currently. It'll be put out mostly through grants, and maybe there might be more funding if you know, they decide that infrastructure and the environment is our #1 priority, then you're going to see an increase in the funding again.
Millie does have one question.
Uh-huh.
Millie, go ahead and unmute.
Whoops, okay. I have a question. Are you familiar with the airport specific area plan? Because it was stated at the end of the water and sewer part that consider City of Prescott funding for water and sewer service extension. And since we're including all 2,800 people as an incentive for development and redevelopment. So how in the world is the city, I mean, this goes back to the one I have is May of 2016. And wouldn't the city have been putting money aside for that extension?
The sewer extension that you're talking about in the airport area is more specific to the regional mains that I talked about in the overview of who pays for what. And regional mains are typically backbone infrastructure that development can tie into in order to take wastewater from those little specific neighborhoods out to the collection and treatment plant. So the plan that you're talking about is development driven as well. So we don't typically budget for infrastructure that does not have some immediate use. And that's why we have a master plan for the airport area, so that if and when development comes into that area, we know what we may need to do at that time. And then we refine those plans as we know what kind and type of infrastructure needs are what's needed for that type of development.
Millie has another comment.
Okay, this whole area is a 50 square mile section that applies to the airport specific area plan. So how are we not included?
Again, the airport specific area plan is a higher level planning document for long range planning. We don't really know what's going to come into an area when we develop a plan. We make assumptions about what might come into that area. And then as development actually occurs, then we refine those plans and we move forward. So I'm going to suggest that we keep moving because we have a lot more material to cover here today. Thank you, Candace, so much for your overview of grants. And, you know, grants is something that we did want to explore because we know it could potentially be one source of funding, which may or may not work as we continue to move forward. So let's go on to the next slide. So the next thing we're going to talk about are the preliminary costs we received from Carollo and possible financing and funding options. So in their preliminary work, Carollo developed this map for us, which you can see shows approximately 11 unsewered areas within the city of Prescott. The 11th one is kind of up near the top here, near the airport. It's kind of tiny off to the side, but that's the 11th one. And in those 11 unsewered areas that we've identified, approximately 6 of them are primarily or all in the county, and 5 of them are within the city limits. And that will become an important point later as we talk about different funding mechanisms and options. Also, as part of the research, we discovered there are approximately 3,339 parcels within these 11 unsewered areas. And just under 31. It's actually 3097, but we're going to round up here. About 3,100 water-only customers are currently served by the city of Prescott within these 11 unsewered areas. So it's important to note that this information does not include limited individual parcels spotted throughout the city that may not be on city septic. This is just for these areas.
While you're right there, do you have, and I've asked this, but I don't have the number again, based upon the amount of water that we allocate to individual residential houses on average, and those 31 water user customers only, how much recharge would we get back if they were all on sewer?
That's coming up in the future slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Requiring minds one of them.
There's so many questions. Sometimes it's hard to know what to put first, but hopefully it's all in there. All right, so we'll just go to the next slide. So as part of the preliminary research that we've been doing with Carrillo, we asked them to determine a potential cost for the neighborhood collection mains. So that's the mains that would typically be in the street in front of your house that the developer would typically build that you would then connect to with your home. So right now, Carrillo is estimating approximately $81 million for just the construction of neighborhood collection mains within the 11 unsewered areas that we've identified. Based on financing costs from Mark Woodfill, which would be a WIFA loan for 25 years at 3.5% financing, that's that low interest loan that he was just speaking of, is approximately 41 million additional to almost $42 million. So just the neighborhood collection mains alone are approximately $123 million. Now, the cost for on-lot improvements, we estimate these, we took the 2008 study that was done and applied an inflationary factor in order to get an idea of what it might cost to connect the on-lot improvements today. That resulted in about $47 million to the 3,100 homeowners. If we finance that $47 million, it would be an additional $24 million for a total of $71.7 million for the on-lot connections for 3,100 lots. That's a total cost of about $195 million right here, $194.8 million. Please keep in mind, this is all 3,100 lots at the same time. The city is not going to have the resources, either financially, manpower, etc., to connect 3,100 lots all at the same time. Oops, sorry, it's being sensitive and I keep touching it. It's likely that build out of these 3,100 lots would take place over 15 to 20 years. So please keep that in mind. But for the purposes of a snapshot in time today, that's what the numbers are that we're going to be looking at here today. Is there any questions on this slide before I move to the next slide?
So I just did kind of like a number geek. If you take the on-lot improvements, 47 million, and divide it by 3,100 lots, that's a mere $15,000 per home, which is really nothing. That's so inexpensive.
We're gonna get to that on a future slide.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Like I said, it's hard to know which piece of the chicken or the egg to go first, but we're gonna get to that part of it as well.
But this represents a worst case scenario. These estimates are conservative, high, to make sure that we would not get short of money. And it represents that everything is done at one time.
Correct.
Which is not possible.
It's not possible, no.
I mean, even with my fantastic essentials out there, it's not possible.
We peel every contract.
Yeah.
Well, again, even though if it did right now, it's projected high, if we go over 15 or 20 years, it's probably closer, right? Because you have inflation
Right.
that's going to hit it. So it's not like super high.
Way to bring us back to reality.
I was gonna say, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, what a downer.
You go to the back of the room.
All right. All right, so now we're going to go into, I'm going to show you an example of the impacts of the $194.5 million if the ratepayers were to absorb that cost in its entirety or in pieces. Okay, so keep that in mind. So here at the top of the slide, this is what we just looked at, right? This is our 123 million for neighborhood mains, our 71 million for on-lot improvements, and our $194.8 million in total cost. In order to absorb these costs by the ratepayers, just for the neighborhood collection mains, so just for the neighborhood collection mains, there would be a 32.8% increase in the rate to the ratepayers for 25 years. Right now, the average monthly sewer bill for the ratepayers only in the 11 areas that we've identified. This is not the average sewer rate for all ratepayers in the city. In fact, this is just slightly less. This is based on information that we know as far as what goes through the water meters in the 11 areas that we've looked at. The average monthly rate in 2020 is $46.58. If we finance the $123 million right here, just the $123 million, to the ratepayers, all the ratepayers, it would increase their monthly bill by $15.29 for 25 years. Does that make sense?
All the ratepayers in the city of Prescott or in those areas?
All the ratepayers in the city of Prescott.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, this slide is representing all ratepayers in the city of Prescott, everything you're seeing here. If we finance the on-lot improvement portion of what's required to do this, $71.7 million, there would be approximately a 19.5% increase to the sewer rate for all ratepayers, which would equate to about $9.08 a month for 25 years. So this is something that we can look at as a group when we're looking at options for funding. You know, are we going to ask the ratepayers to pay a portion of the sewer improvements that are needed? Are we going to ask the ratepayers to pay all of the improvements that are needed? So this slide breaks that down for you. It tells you what the increase would be. And again, this is a snapshot today if we built it all today. So if we started on a project next year, the increase would not be $15.09. It would be something significantly less than that because it would be based on the first project that we do.
So
And
this
each
slide needs to be first and foremost at every meeting we have.
It's a very important slide, and the next two slides are also very important because I'm going to demonstrate to you what it would cost if the property owner absorbed the cost.
So one thing I want to state though, I mean, this is just a big world picture in my mind, that it's not only about the individuals that need to hook up because they may have a failing system, there also is some realistic gains of cleaning up our lakes that everybody uses, or a lot of people use.
Yes.
Fishing, boating, kayaking. So it's not just about one component. I want to make sure everybody understands that. We have both two water bodies that are impaired by the problem that we have today. So by cleaning this up, so when you start talking about who's going to pay for what, and I've already paid my share, if we go down that road, we're not going to get anything done. We're here for a specific reason, and that's to take the septic systems out of service that will help clean up our lakes and our environment.
And as we move, and you're correct, Councilman Blair, as we move toward a written policy, that will be part of the written policy is the benefits to the community of implementing this program.
So I guess the reason why I'm saying that is if we want to look at a legitimate funding level per lot hookups, we look at maybe a 75-25 split, if you want to talk about funding, where the citizens as water payers pay 25%, 50%, whatever that case may be, and we can come to that number. But I don't think it should all rely and be on that individual property owner that has a septic system. This is bigger than just that one house, at least in my opinion.
And that's one of the options that we can, in our, as I said, we're gonna have multiple discussions about financing. That's an option we can bring back to you so that you can see what the numbers would look like if we split it in percentages as opposed to splitting it by the neighborhood portion or the on-lot improvement portion. There are multiple ways we can look at it, and that's the kind of guidance we're looking for from this group.
Sorry to drag you down.
You are not dragging me down. This is exactly the kind of feedback we need, so thank you. Does there anybody else have a question?
Just a comment, I will, kind of tag on to what Councilman Blair said. It will take a commitment from the community, the entire community, to make this program go forward.
That's correct.
There's no question.
That's correct. And you know what? When you start looking at the numbers, now you can say big or small, like them or not like them, but when you look at that number for fee hookup on a monthly rate, and you say, okay, if the property owner's gonna pay 75% of that, is that attainable? And in my opinion, yes, it is. So I mean, as we go through this, we're gonna have to take some of those avenues just to see what the pleasure of the community is. Because there's gonna be people that don't like it, because they don't like numbers going up.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think they'd probably really like to have a swimming beach at Watson Lake or Willow Lake or some of the other amenities we could provide. And at some point in time, the EPA and the state of Arizona ADEQ is gonna hammer us on these two lakes if we don't start doing something about it. If we can show them that we're doing something about it, it makes us go down that road a little bit further.
At some point, it would also be good, in my opinion, to elaborate on other opportunities that the city is implementing to assist in improving water quality throughout the watershed, and some stuff that Public Works is working on, just to include that in the conversation, because it's a multifaceted approach to improving water quality in our community.
And I'm just a small one, not to sidetrack too much, but we have, as Public Works, have gone to great extent to reline a lot of those sewer pipes that are in our creeks and tributaries at the ratepayers' cost. Right? Anything else not split up, this is just what it's gonna cost us to improve our system. This is the same thing here.
And we have a presentation coming up at council in December in regards to the lakes, the watershed, and we've already seen positive impacts from the work that has been done on associated with that study.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
Any other comments? Okay.
Glenn, before you go past the slide, I got one comment and one wet blanket comment. The 52.3% increase, which is huge, and again, this is all one way as opposed to partially as we were talking about. But that's not in addition to the other rate increases that are needed over the next few years, because Craig wants a new treatment plant expansion at the airport and that kind of stuff.
We've got good news for you on that front.
Good. But also the other question that Councilman Blair asked was here in this footnote about how much water is currently being served into these areas. So I didn't know if you wanted to cover that.
Yeah, actually,
I can't see it.
that was the next thing I was gonna,
Okay.
go to. So Mark did add this footnote here on the needed rate increase. It's less the additional effluent revenue. And I'm gonna read it and I'll let Mark explain it because it's really his footnote. So it says the value for the effluent received was calculated using the winter average for 3,097 unsewered accounts annualized. So that's 116,284,940 gallons, which is equivalent to 356.86 acre feet. So that answers your question, Councilman Blair.
That's a huge number.
356.86 acre feet is the equivalent of 116,284,940 gallons of water. Multiplied by the annual value of $250 per acre foot. So a $25,000 value for a 100-year right divided by 100 years, which comes to approximately $89,216.23. So that amount was credited against what would be needed for a rate increase because of the value of the effluent that's being generated by the home, the 3,100 homes.
And that's the way it should be.
And again, that has already been reduced, unfortunately, from the 52% rate.
That's the wet blanket.
That's the wet one.
Wet blanket.
The next question I would have, because these are questions that when it gets to council are going to want to know. When you start talking about the 357 acre feet of water, how many individual residential houses would that serve? You're talking about AED coming in now with about that same amount of water. So do we know how many houses that would serve?
Well, I want to say that when we were talking about this, we were talking about taking that water and putting it back towards the aquifer.
That's correct, but I still think to put my arms around what that means for rooftops.
Okay.
Hold on, I'll tell you.
That amount of water,
1,400.
that whole idea behind this is leave it in the aisle. And if we do that, when you start talking about the other developments that are coming in, and you can offset and show them that you're offsetting it with this opposed to this, that makes some value savings.
I got 2,099.
I divided by 0.17. Oh, I'm sorry, I have the wrong number in here.
See, that's 2,100 houses.
Yeah, this slide is-
2,100.
2,100 houses, that's all AED out there. Think about that, that's a lot of water sewage savings.
When again, there's a lot of big numbers on this slide. Yeah,
Sure.
that's a lot of water, $200 million.
A lot of dollars. But you know, but this is what the people need to hear out there. This is not fluff, this is reality. And we need to show reality to be able to get this thing to where we need it to go.
I think council too, council members, when we have council members that vote no to annexing a subdivision, not allowing him to be on. Well, that's a major point.
It is.
You have to think about it, it's gonna happen. It is. So they're tying our hands, not allowing them to come in, and we're trying to bring these people in to have a better system.
Well, and that's why when you get to bagging this a whole different bag of tricks, when you get out there and you start talking about super majority and two wagging the tail of five others, it's just absolutely wrong. That's not how democracy was set up. And so what we end up with is we end up getting bad situations out of a bad deal.
Well, and that's I think, our goal is, or our mission, is to get everybody on board with this.
Correct.
And see that it's gonna help everybody.
Yeah, and I think this slide does a great value job of doing that.
Sure.
Thank you, Glenn, thank you.
In regards to the effluent generation, just so we're all on the same page, in regards to our goal and our mission, is not to generate more effluent, to promote more to go.
That's correct. My statement to the city of Prescott, to the residents, this will not be used for residential growth.
Then it has no value.
And making it affordable.
What was that?
I know, the value goes down, the value goes down.
I'm just gonna put my muzzle back on.
I was gonna say, we probably don't want to hear
Get that
that
stick out
anyway.
of there, get that stick.
And again, the value here is based on what are effluent rights being sold for,
Sure,
for development, so
but you gotta have
if
a way
you're
to,
not gonna use it, it doesn't have a value.
but you have to have a way to quantify it, and that's the way you
Yeah.
quantify it.
Right, but yeah, the 89,000 doesn't exist if you don't use,
If you don't charge the.
yeah, so then the rate is going to be a little higher.
Well, we can say we're not gonna use it for residential houses, but we didn't say anything about selling it on the open market. I can say that.
And we didn't hear you.
All right, this is all great feedback. I'm gonna move on so that Mark doesn't get in trouble, or Councilman Blair.
Yep.
All right, so now we've put together a different scenario for you. And the next scenario is how would the cost be distributed for the neighborhood mains and the on-lot improvements if it was solely paid for by the property owner? And this is how it was approached in 2008. So these are not 2008 numbers. We're using the $194.8 million estimate that we have created. And here you go, Sandy. Here's our average cost per lot, right? So for the neighborhood collection main part of it, including the financing, it's approximately $39,000. And that's the average. Some are gonna be more, some are gonna be a little less. It just depends on how difficult it is to put the sewer in or not, or what other improvements are needed when sewer goes in. So this average cost per lot, again, we started with the average monthly rate. We did the math for 25 years at 3.9% financing. It's an increase of $132.36 every month for 25 years just for the neighborhood collection main, if that cost were borne by the homeowner. Again, here for the on-lot improvements, the average cost would be around $15,000 per lot. Sorry. With the financing around $8,000 for a total of $23,150. Financed over 25 years is approximately $77.17 per lot per month for 25 years. So for the cost to be borne by the individual property owners would add as much as $209 a month for 25 years in order to pay off the amount of money that would be required to install these improvements. Are there any questions on this slide? Again, this is just another snapshot where we break it down so you can see what the on-lot improvement portion might be, and you can see what the neighborhood main portion might be, or you can also see what the total might be.
I have a question for Mike Breen.
Okay.
Mike, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, my question is the neighborhood collection mains, the lines, main lines and the on-lot improvement fees, what it's costing each of the homeowners to get a line out to the sewer? I'm not sure what those two represent. Can you clarify that?
So the neighborhood collection mains, those would be the sewer pipes that would typically be in the street that a homeowner would connect to. The on-lot improvements would be the private yard line from the residence to the sewer main in the street. And it would also include the cost of abandoning septic system. Does that answer your question? I want to make sure we got his question.
He raised his hand
Mark, you
again.
have a question?
Is it, in the estimate, did they look at the main line?
That answered my question. It just didn't, the only other aspect is people who have to put in some type of pump on in their property and ongoing maintain that over the years to pump uphill to a sewer. That's probably not in the impact fees.
And you're correct. I apologize. The on-lot improvements also include the cost of the impact fee. And there will be some neighborhoods in our preliminary look at the 11 different neighborhoods. There will be some low pressure sewer, so you're correct. Some lots may have to have pumps or grinders or things like that. But again, these costs are averages. We're looking for an average number, so it may or may not include those. Again, the cost may be slightly more, slightly less, depending on the neighborhood and how the connection to sewer has to take place.
So my question was, the sewer laterals to the main up to the property line, were those included in the estimates in that regard or not?
I'm not sure, Mark, because we took the on-lot improvement costs from the 2008 study and applied an inflationary factor, so I don't really know what they contemplated in that. And the cost can vary greatly, not just from area to area, but even home to home, depending on how the sewer is set up now and how it would have to be reestablished in order to connect to wherever we install the sewer main. So that's more of an individualized question, I think. Are there any other questions on this slide? it keeps wanting to go to the next slide, so I'm going to go to the next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the out-of-the-box things that the finance director has been talking about that we could contemplate to help offset some of these costs. Again, this is another tool in the toolbox. That's what we're talking about here today. So it was suggested that we look at possibly implementing a new fee for a water account that has no sewer. This would be a fee. We don't have a dollar amount for this fee yet. And again, we're still working on some of these numbers, but it's the concept that we're looking for feedback from the group on, whether to continue to research it or not. But a new fee for water accounts which have no sewer. This could encourage water conservation because of the fact that we would receive little to no recharge back to the aquifer for folks that are on city water that do not return anything back to the sewer system for recharge. We could use these funds to look at offsetting some of the costs of installing the sewer, either for design. We could use them for some of the low-income individuals that we keep talking about. We could use them to do planning work, things like that. From some of the numbers that we've been looking at, we're not seeing it as a huge revenue driver, but it could give us some seed money to start looking into some of the more difficult areas. It could provide us with grant matching funds. There's a number of things that we could do with this fee if we were to collect a fee from folks that do not return water back to the aquifer.
Question I have is, if knowing it's a fee, and knowing it's going to be assessed to those that don't have sanitary sewer, how long does this fee go on for? Is it into perpetuity or till the system gets built? How do you look at that to be able to, I mean, I guess there has to be some buy-off.
Again, these are just kind of rough ideas. There's a whole legal question that we need to get legal buy-in on this, whether we can legally do this beyond the cost of the lost effluent, which is pretty minimal fee. The other fee we're going to talk about is what a fee that when there's a sewer line there. So to answer your question, Councilman, it might be one fee when there's no sewer available and another fee when their sewer line is in front of their property.
Okay.
And again, both of those fees have significant legal questions. I've talked to Rep. Ellis, the consultant who we've used the last couple of times for a rate study, and they raised some concerns that we would need to run by legal, whether these are legal fees, because they are kind of slipping beyond fee to a tax because of there's no real direct service once you get over the $2 or $3 a month that the effluent would be worth.
Good, bad, or indifferent, fee or tax. If these homeowners have been assessed this fee/tax and they're not receiving any benefits from it, that's another dicey situation and a slippery road.
Well, that's why it switches from a fee to a tax.
Oh.
A fee, a fee is a fee that you get some, at least general benefit. We charge what's our one, clean water fee? Clean water fee.
We got a couple.
Mark and I have debated for 8 years whether a streetlight fee is really a tax, but that's a whole nother issue. I agree, but anyway, but that's the difference is what's the value or what's the, you almost be better off considering a penalty because the city can charge penalties for, particularly if somebody has sewer in front of their house where you're refusing, if the city adopted a city code that said, as soon as sewer's adjacent to your property, whatever that means, you have 6 months or a year and a half to shut down your septic tank and connect to city sewer. And if you don't, we're going to penalize you every month. And I mean, you could, that's sort of draconian, but that would be a legally permissible thing to do. That's a huge policy decision to penalize people who refuse to connect. But again, if you think about it, it's not that much different than penalizing people who don't follow the speed limit or who or who pollute, pollute or who litter. There's you can penalize people for that concept because there's a greater good. But that's a big decision.
And these are just kind of thoughts to see if you're interested in us pursuing this. There's all sorts of legal issues, because can you even penalize people who aren't citizens? Because a lot of these homes don't live in the city limits.
Well, that we have to look at that, but if you're not for residents, for instance, and maybe non-residents, it's hard to know. And the other challenge, obviously, is when they're outside the county, there's a big difference between forming an improvement district for inside the city and forming a improvement district that's a financing route to go for outside.
Yeah.
Because you can't force them to do that. So it's a big time policy decision about who's paying to connect, to extend lines into neighborhoods. And again, I think it's been emphasized, but I'll just emphasize it again. It's not quote unquote the city. It's not the taxpayers. It's everybody else who's on the system. If the system is extended with no additional cost to the individual homes that have the opportunity to connect, it's every other ratepayer in town. And then there's a sort of fairness issue. That's again a big policy decision. It's not really a legal issue.
So again, as Mark mentioned, the next kind of out of the box thought was to charge a sewer bill to any property that is adjacent and abutting the sewer main, but chooses not to connect. So using the average rate at 12 months in a year, it's an income of about $559 annually per lot that potentially fronts a sewer main. And we'll continue to look at how many of the lots in these areas already front sewer mains, so we can give you that information in the next go around. As I said, we're still working. It's kind of a work in progress. But again, these funds could be used to offset some of the costs of installing sewer. Oh, what did I do?
I'm not sure.
I needed to come back up.
I guess we're telling you your time's short.
Oh, I don't think so. I got 14 more minutes. Let me see here. Oh, that's not good. Yeah, don't call me short.
No short jokes here.
I'm vertically challenged. All right, well, I don't know how to get this back up. Let me, I'll just work from the PowerPoint that I created, because we have one more slide to go over. And so it's just kind of, it's a summary of what we talked about today. In the area of grants, we need to look at eligibility, which, as Candace has pointed out to us and the research we've done so far, that most of the eligibility falls under the municipality and district level. We have so far found very few opportunities at the homeowner level. There are a few, and we're going to continue to explore those to the extent that we can, so that they can be an option as we go from area to area. But primarily eligibility falls in the municipality and the district level, which is what we need to be considering as we move forward. Additionally, grants traditionally only pay a portion of the cost. They want matching funds. They want some buy-in from whoever receives their funding that they're going to follow through because they have a stake in the game. Also, grants are not guaranteed funding. Sometimes it's subject to funding availability. They may put out a grant and then things change. The world is constantly changing. As Candace pointed out, sometimes they put money into the economy to help stimulate it, and then the next year that money's gone. So we can't necessarily rely on a single funding source for grants for multiple years, because that can change over time. As far as the city / the ratepayers, which we keep emphasizing, that's everyone who pays a utility bill. They do have the opportunity to use Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, in case anyone wasn't sure what that meant, or WIFA loans, which have the benefit of very low interest rates, and they can be financed for 25 years. But again, that's going to be at the city level. If we use sewer rates to subsidize costs, that's going to result in an increase to the ratepayers. That's just how it will be, and however it will be over a long period of time. So again, as Mark pointed out, That's not the only thing that could potentially increase rates. So we could see rate increases higher than we typically have seen in the past as we move forward with implementing some of these projects. And finally, the general fund cannot be used for these kinds of improvements. General fund monies are not used for sewer improvements. At the property owner level, we've laid out several different financing mechanisms. We can use special assessment districts or improvement districts. However, those are limited to only the 5 areas that are inside the city limits. So we know we have potentially 6 areas that are either all in the county or a combination of county and city. So special assessment districts would not be able to be used in those particular areas. The subject of general obligation bonds came up. General obligation bonds are a tax that you see on your tax bill. And in order to pass a general obligation bond, you must have 50% plus one person say they want to be taxed before you can actually assess a general obligation bond.
Well, another issue with that is it wouldn't be a tax on the people that are not in the city.
Right.
So
Correct.
if you're just doing it for the citizens of the city, that's one thing, but if it's beyond that, they don't pay anything.
Correct. And then we also have the option of adding these additional charges to the utility bill. This is kind of the foundation on why we put the examples up on the screen that we did for you today based on utility bill potential changes, because that is the one funding mechanism or financing mechanism that we can use, whether it's in the city or outside the city. And then, of course, we've thrown out there the couple of ideas for the monthly sewer bill to generate what we call seed money to get things going, a new fee for water accounts that have no sewer, and sewer bills for properties that already front the main. So that's a lot to think about. We've given you a lot of information today. And as I said, we're going to have more conversations about financing, but your homework is to look at this information in your own time, absorb it, think about what the options that you think might be most viable for the city to implement this. And if you have ideas about implementation, as Councilman Blair pointed out, well, what if we do a percentage split instead of a you pay for this and we pay for that? If you have those kinds of ideas, please shoot them to Carrie in an email, because then we can explore what that looks like and bring it back to you as far as what it looks like. It takes a little time to get these narrowed down, refined.
For this thing to have legs and really go somewhere, we need to have that done. Because Mark's going to start meeting with the city manager and putting budgets together for this next fiscal year. And if we're absolutely serious about doing this, we have to come up with some ideas, how we're going to do it, what the city's responsibility is going to be. And I also think at some point in time, some of these great slides that you presented to us, that we could find a way to pull out a couple of specific slides and send them in the water bills to the unsewered areas, so they know what we're thinking. I think, and we can also get people on board the same way by having them know what we're thinking. Yeah.
As far as the program timeframe, are we looking at, what as Public Works and Finance, if you look at this monster we're talking about, are we talking about a 15-year, 20-year program to capture these 3,100 homes potentially? Is that kind of the thinking?
That is the thought, yes.
Okay. So with that in mind, we talk about low-hanging fruit. There are areas that are going to be most desirable to connect first or to extend service first. I think at some point it's going to be real helpful to have that first part of the program, the first phase of the program kind of identified, so that we'll have a better understanding of those numbers, because these are so broad and so large, nobody can relate to them. But if we have one project defined, then we can have a more meaningful understanding of really the cost that we're talking about, as far as ratepayers, as far as potentially affecting private property owners, and I think it'd be more palatable.
So next month, our topic, we're actually going to have Carollo here in December. At that point, they will have refined the numbers area by area, as well as any we call them downstream or offsite improvements that might be needed. And we've asked them to assess each area, not in terms of a priority, but as in terms of things that would be easier to accomplish, things that might be more moderate. There might be some offsite, but they're not super expensive sort of thing. And then those that will be most difficult for whatever reason, or but most difficult doesn't equate to most costly. And there are other factors that we will consider as a group in terms of prioritizing areas. But next month, our presentation will be by Corolla, and we will be talking about each area and what's involved in those areas.
Gwen, I guess if we're done there, I agree with you, Mark. Thank you for that, because it's very important to, pardon?
Millie has one more statement.
Okay, go ahead, Melanie.
Millie?
Oh, okay. I was going to ask about, you said that the most difficult does not necessarily mean the most costly. And I think in the 2008 study, there were 2 areas that were the most costly. It was the North District and another one. And I was afraid if we not go with the most costly first, it will be even more money down the road by the time the easier ones are done.
And thank you, Billy. I think that'd have to be a determination of the council and the funding mechanism. I think the most important thing is have Corolla next month share with us those each individual broke out zones, so we have a better understanding. This big picture is a great look, but now we need to get down to a smaller look and move forward. So the next meeting is when?
December 16th at 9:30, which is a Wednesday, in the council chambers. We'll be back in chambers.
And you will send a reminder out to all members?
I will.
Because I know that Jane had to leave and she wanted to know.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else have anything? As always, Public Works, Mark, Woodfield from Finance, thank you, everybody, for doing this. I feel like we're at least getting farther down the street
Yeah. Making some ground.
to truly, I don't think the city manager would have given, and the mayor given me the opportunity to do this, because we're expending a lot of staff time and hours, and this program needs to go forward, or it's all gonna be put on the shelf and just wasted one more time. And it's too big of a project to have that happen. We'll keep working on it.
I do have a question. Has there been staff consideration of are we going to have any kind of public opportunity for input beyond these Zoom meetings, or publicize something in the paper to get some more input in this process prior to giving policy recommendations to council?
I haven't, and the reason why I haven't gone any further is because I think unless we as a committee come to an understanding that we're all on board with.
Right.
And we have a defined presentation, then we're really kind of doing it backwards. Once we get all the pieces and we feel comfortable as a group moving forward with more public participation, then we'll go down that direction.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
thanks, Gwen.